Winning a solo tournament on NA Central is really hard. Doing it on controller is even harder, but somehow an EU controller player just won an NA solo tournament on 115 ping. French pro Kurama placed first in the first NAC solo series qualifier, and this isn't a one-off. He consistently places well in NAC tournaments and qualifies for set lobby finals. And he isn't even getting high kill games. In this tournament, his highest kill game was an 8 kill 15, and he finished with just 36 total kills. So how exactly does he do it? This video is going to be more focused on mid-games and endgame strategy, but it is worth mentioning that Kurama plays a very consistent early game as well. Kurama lands at this large house at the center of the map every single game. Something interesting about his early game is that he spends a ton of time looting, as he tries to loot as much around his drop spot as possible, instead of always prioritizing early rotations. He is hyper aware of other players landing near him in order to avoid any early game fights. His drop spot doesn't have much metal, so he always makes sure to get mostly cap wood from around his drop and brick from the rocks in the nearby area so he doesn't get jumped with not many builds when he goes to farm metal. He gets his metal either from the inner loop station to the south or the generator location to the west. And in this example here, he is pushed by Muzz, one of the best solo players on NA at the generator location. Kurama does not want to take early game fights if he can avoid it, as build fights on 115 ping are really difficult and have a low success rate. So when he is pushed here, he doesn't panic. Instead, he builds a lot to protect himself with all the mats he has collected and claim space, and instantly crouches so Muzz can't use visual audio to track his location. Kurama waits until he hears another player push that distracts Muzz, so he just runs down the mountain in the opposite direction when he feels like Muzz is distracted. Lurking in fights where you're playing defensively is really important, as a lot of good fighters these days heavily rely on tracking visual audio to always stay looking at the opponent. So this can really help stall out the fight. If you are on very high ping like Kurama or just not a very good fighter, it's often good to just patiently wait and look for an opportunity to disengage, as placing well is much more important than one single mid-game kill in these solo cups. In another game, he runs into an opponent and ends up sitting in zone to make sure he doesn't get into a mid-game fight, as he has little to gain from it. You can also see here that he's not afraid to use the wingsuit in early game to rotate, and this is because he really doesn't use the wingsuit very much in the end game, as you will see, so he doesn't have to worry about using all 10 charges. Going into the mid game, Kurama clearly has a formulaic mid-game plan that he sticks to so that he can make the end game consistently. Something I have noticed is that he runs around with his builds out much more than other players, so that the second he gets shot at, he's ready with his wall out to protect himself. Even though it doesn't take very long to open your builds, that fraction of a second where you have to press a button could be game saving when you have 115 ping, since your builds take longer to place. In the earlier mid-game zones, the most important bit of positioning Kurama does is that he always looks for an elevated surface like a cliff, hill, or mountain. When he finds a good elevated location, he always bases up in a single brick base, and this gives him good sight lines for tags for Storm Surge on rotating players behind him. As you can see, Kurama gets to edge zone here and is able to beam players far away with the Deadeye AR, which he always carries into the mid-game for easy surge damage. This season, it isn't quite as important to get on the dead side of zone or the center of zone as much as long as you are ahead of other players rotating. Kurama isn't greedy with his rotates, knowing that even if his positioning isn't great, the wingsuit can take you so far that your zone position doesn't quite matter as much, so he often prioritizes areas with a lot of player traffic for storm surge damage in these stacked games. Because of this, he generally ends up on the back edge of zone, ahead of other players so that he has good sight lines for players rotating in for free surge tags, and sometimes he's able to pick up free kills too. It is worth being aware that in lower elo lobbies where there isn't surge and players aren't as good, you are more at risk at being pushed if you base up in a single brick base. But either trying to create space and disengage, or hiding inside of a building is a good way to combat this in low level lobbies. If storm surge isn't as much of a pressing issue for him, he also sometimes lands at buildings so that he can refarm materials and get back up to 5-5-5. Another really interesting strategy that he does is he will often run part of the half in, half out zone, or the 50-50 zone, instead of just using his wingsuit the whole way, which most players do. I was really surprised when I saw this, but it's actually quite smart in practice. When he isn't completely on the back side of the 50-50 zone, he will often start running to zone instead of using his wingsuit, and looking back for tags on players who are rotating with their wingsuits. While it might seem very risky to be walking out in the open like that, basically everyone is in the air, so most other players who are looking back for tags are looking up at the sky and focused on people gliding, so he's able to move relatively undetected. It also allows him to not land in a really congested area with 30 other people and potentially end up landing in someone else's build who happens to land right by him. He does this in a few games this tournament, and some of the other games he partially runs the 50-50 zone and then wingsuits for the rest of it. When Kurama does use his wingsuit though, he is really good about doing it in a protected manner. I'm sure most of you know this by now, but the wingsuit lifts you up about a wall and a half when you use it, making you really vulnerable during the startup animation. It's really important to build walls blocking off any side angles and to leave the top open to launch out. Kurama is very consistent at doing this. He often plans out his rotates with the wingsuit so that he is fully protected during the startup animation, and is really good about adjusting to protect himself on the fly with the wingsuit. He will often use natural cover to use the wingsuit in a safe setting, as this blocks off multiple angles during the startup and also doesn't reveal to your opponents that you are wingsuiting since you aren't building the necessary structure to wingsuit. When I say he is good at adjusting, look at what I mean here, where he is originally set up with the wingsuit chamber to safely launch to zone. As I mentioned, opponents can often recognize when you are going to wingsuit from this build design, making you potentially vulnerable. In this example, this player griefs his wingsuit chamber by placing a cone and floor above it, but instead of panicking immediately after this, he covers himself to rotate a little extra by foot to make sure his opponent used his own wingsuit and wasn't a threat to shoot him anymore. He made a quick judgment that the opponent wouldn't be making an aggressive play like that on the backside of zone without having their own wingsuit, meaning that they would have to rotate in the next couple seconds anyways. He was then protected by the builds around him, and his patience allowed him to charge up the wingsuit freely after the aggressor already had to rotate and wasn't a threat anymore. As I mentioned though, he doesn't wingsuit that much in comparison to other players, especially in the endgame, as he prefers to rotate on foot since the wingsuit can be so risky due to the long startup and blind landing. Moving on to the endgame, the most important strategy that Kurama uses is to get front low. Always. When I say get front low, I mean that Kurama rotates to the front side of zone every time and gets to the lowest layer he can as often as possible in these endgames. There are multiple reasons he does this. First, it is a really strong way for him to get refreshes. One way that Kurama does this is by investing a ton of mats to claim a lot of space on the low ground so that he can get easy kills. Most players in rotating zones would only build 1 or 2 boxes to keep themselves safe, but Kurama uses his builds as a form of offense. By creating a ton of space, any player that comes to the low ground is at threat of being edited on and easily killed for a refresh. While it might feel like he's overspending and players want to conserve mats more, think of it like an investment, where you put mats in on the front end for a chance at a bigger return of more mats through an easy refresh. It is a risk, but it usually pays off for him. Since he is on the front side of zone also, other low ground players often have to run past all of his builds when rotating from backside, making them easy targets. Another reason that the low ground has a bunch of easy refreshes and free kills is that there are a lot of players with very little resources on the low ground during this part of the game. Think about it. When are you as a player at your weakest in the endgame? When you don't have any mats. And where do you go in these situations? You usually try and rat around low ground and use old builds and hide. While these players usually don't have a ton of mats, the 150 mats from Siphon can really add up, and any additional heals can be really useful at this point in the game as well, as you can see in the next example. In this example, Kurama hears multiple players on the backside of zone, and since he has created all of the space, he hasn't added on the self-reviving player to fully kill him. With this refresh, he notices all the medkits on the ground, and since he already has 3 medkits, he knows he will be able to tank a lot of zone, get the Siphon mats from these players, and have more medkits left over for tanking zone later. He gets 500 mats from this, setting him up with game-winning loot, and he's able to clutch up a second with all of his white heals for a really good game. The loot from all of these players stuck on the back of low ground is what got him that second place, even if they individually didn't have that much. He also used this hilarious strat I've never seen in an endgame, where I don't know if he was trolling or not, but he blatantly threw a big pot down in front of someone behind him as bait, and they jump toward it, and he doesn't even hit the pump quick enough but is still able to clean up the kill. I don't know if he was just messing around or if it even actually worked, or if the other player just happened to be rotating, but it was way too funny and bizarre not to share. Another reason that going front low works so well is that the mid and higher grounds are often pretty chaotic this season. With the amount of wingsuits going off, it's very risky to be on higher layers since you can get randomly landed on by people gliding. Also, high ground is fairly strong this season since the wingsuit isn't very good for retaking height, so high ground is a real threat for higher layers. Because of this, being on a mid-ground layer can be bad since you can easily get sprayed by height, wasting your mats and making you more vulnerable to being pushed by other players. Also, on low ground, you only need to be worried about players from above you and to the side, where on mid-ground layers you need to be worried about those players as well as players from below you. Kurama is also able to make these low ground front side rotates work well since he is really smart positionally. He will often move the second the new zone pops so that he can claim the front side of low ground before any other players get there. This makes it so that he isn't struggling to find a place to box up and people aren't able to look back on him since he is always the first one there. He then will often stagger and look back for any stragglers or free refreshes since he's always moving early. Another aspect of how he is positionally strong here is that he often plays the side of zone really late in endgames. When I say this, I'm meaning that he is either on the right side or the left side of zone while still being on the front low side. This gives him really strong lobby visibility, as all players are on one side of him in zone, giving him better lines of sight for refreshes. He also doesn't need to worry as much about people trying to kill him from the backside of his tarp since that side's not in zone. One more thing to note is he has really good movement and is really skilled at building while moving to rotate quickly and safely in these endgame situations. What Kurama will do is use his whole sprint bar and slides while building in order to move quickly while rotating and still covering himself, and he essentially never is caught rotating without sprint in later zones. He's able to move so quickly and then rebox before anyone can notice or react to him, and he always is trying to get down to the front side of low ground if it's available. Even when he gets hit on a higher elevation, he will stay on a mid-ground layer as long as he needs to heal up and then start looking to go to the front side of low ground, as it has high refresh potential and less pressure on the rotates. So those are the strats that Kurama uses to consistently get top 3s in stacked endgames on high ping. And if you're interested on how Josh Rayleigh can W key and drop high kill games while playing on Canada ping on NAC, click the video on screen.